Welcome to a world of learning, wonder, and discovery. Together, we'll make every idea simple, exciting, and memorable. Watch until the end because every section reveals something new. Stay curious, enjoy every moment of this learning adventure. Subscribe, like, and comment. Let's begin.
Welcome back, students. Let us continue our journey. Today, we will finish our study of ethics in early India and then begin a fascinating new theme, the social world of Varna and Jati, and how people lived together. Aśhoka's Dhamma. Let us begin. Aśhoka's edicts promoted moral conduct, respect for family, non-violence, compassion, and ethical behavior. Let me explain how remarkable this was. Through his rock and pillar edicts, carved for all to see, Aśhoka urged the people to honor their parents and teachers, to respect all faiths, to treat servants and even animals with kindness, and to avoid needless killing. Now think about what this means. Here was a great emperor turning ethics itself into public state policy. He wanted goodness, not just power, to be the guiding rule of his empire. Ethics in Uttaramarur. Remember this. The Uttaramarur inscription expected its candidates to have honest earnings, and to be pure of mind. This shows us clearly that governance required good moral character. Let me explain. In other words, holding public office was tied to honesty and clean conduct, not to ability alone. A candidate had to have earned wealth fairly and to keep an unblemished reputation. And this was not a one-off idea. Later works, too, such as Kamandaka's Nitisara and Banabhata's Kadambari, reflected deeply on ethical kingship and good governance. So you see, the link between good character and good government was a lasting theme in Indian political thought. Varna and Jati. Now we begin a wonderful new theme, the social world. The chapter explains both Varna and Jati. These were social categories, and importantly, they changed over time. Let me explain this carefully, because it is often misunderstood. Varna and Jati were neither fixed nor identical. Varna was a broad, fourfold scheme, while Jati referred to the many actual communities that people lived in. And both of these shifted in meaning across the centuries. So, please do not imagine them as something rigid and unchanging. They were living ideas that developed over a very long time. Early Vedic flexibility. Here is an important point to understand. The early Vedic texts do not show a fixed, birth-based social status. Instead, occupation and identity were much more flexible. Let me explain with a clear example. In the earliest Vedic society, a person's work was not strictly decided by birth. In fact, members of one and the same family could follow quite different occupations. So, we must be careful. The rigid, hereditary system of much later times should not be read back into this early period. Society then was far more open than we sometimes assume. Factors shaping social identity. Finally, let us ask, what shaped a person's social identity? Social identity could depend on many things at once. On ethnicity, on region, on one's village, on gotra, on language, and on occupation. Let me explain why this matters. This reminds us that people in early India, just like people today, carried many overlapping identities at the very same time. A single person might be known by their village, their language, their family lineage, and their trade, all together. So, social belonging was shaped by several factors woven together, never by just a single label. Next, we will look at real evidence about occupations in early families, learn how historians read such evidence carefully, and then meet the famous idea of the 4 varnas. Occupational diversity in a family. Let us begin with a delightful example. There is a verse in the Ṛig Veda, Book 9, Hymn 112, verse 3, which mentions a poet, a father who is a physician, and a mother who grinds corn, all within one single family. This suggests that occupations were flexible in early Vedic society. Let me explain. The verse cheerfully notes that different members of one household followed different trades. Just imagine, the son a poet, the father a healer, the mother grinding grain, each doing their own work. Historians use this charming little verse as evidence that, in those early times, work was not yet strictly tied to a person's birth. Historical interpretation of the verse. Now here is an important lesson in how history is done. That verse is useful evidence, but it also has its limits. It shows us just one example, and so it must be interpreted carefully. Let me explain why. A single hymn cannot possibly describe an entire society. So a careful historian treats it as one useful clue among many, and not as the final word. This is a wonderful reminder for all of us that evidence must always be weighed thoughtfully and never stretched too far to prove more than it really can. Puruṣhasūkta. Remember this key fact. The earliest reference to 4 social categories appears in the Puruṣhasūkta, which is found in Book 10 of the Ṛig Veda. Let me explain its beautiful imagery. This hymn pictures the whole of society symbolically as a single cosmic being called Purusha. The 4 varnas are described as arising from different parts of that one great body. Now think about the meaning behind this image. It expresses the idea that the different groups were all seen as parts of one interdependent whole, each connected to the others, like the limbs of a single living body. Brāhmaṇas. Now let us look at the 4 varnas one by one, beginning with the Brāhmaṇas. The Brāhmaṇas were associated with studying and teaching the Vedas, with performing yajñas, and with giving and receiving gifts. Let me explain their role. Their main duty was seen as preserving knowledge and guiding the rituals of society. That is precisely why learning and teaching were treated as their special responsibilities within the Varna scheme. They were, in a sense, the keepers and teachers of sacred knowledge. Kshatriyas. Finally, let us turn to the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas were associated with warfare and protection, with justice, with yajñas, with charity, and with upholding order in society. Let me explain. As the rulers and warriors, they were expected to defend the people, to punish wrongdoers, and to give generously to others. So you see, their role combined military strength with a deep moral duty, the duty to protect Dhamma itself. Strength and responsibility went hand in hand. Next, we will complete the 4 varnas. Understand how Varna first began as a division of work, and then see how the many Jatis slowly came into being. Vaishyas. Let us continue with the 3rd Varna, the Vaishyas. The Vaishyas were linked with agriculture, with pastoralism, with trade, and also with study, rituals, and charity. Let me explain their importance. As the farmers, the herders, and the merchants of society, the Vaishyas produced and circulated the wealth that supported everyone else. Think about that for a moment. Without their grain, their cattle, and their trade, no kingdom could survive. This is why we may rightly call them the economic backbone of the whole community. Securities. Now let us turn to the 4th Varna, the Shudras. In the traditional scheme, the Shudras were expected to assist the other Varnas. But here is something very important to understand. In real life, they were also engaged in agriculture, in trade, in crafts, and in many other economic activities. Let me explain. The evidence shows that many Shudras were in fact skilled workers, and some were even landowners or traders. So their real lives were far more varied and dignified than a narrow definition of mere service would ever suggest. We must always remember that the reality of people's lives was richer than the neat theory. Varna as a functional division. Here is a key idea to grasp firmly. The chapter stresses that Varna began as a functional division, that is, a division based on roles and values, although this flexibility slowly reduced over time. Let me explain what that means. In other words, the categories first described what people actually did and the qualities valued in that kind of work. It was only gradually, over many centuries, that birth came to decide a person's status more and more rigidly. This is a very important point for understanding how the system slowly hardened over time. It did not begin that way. Sutta Nipata on deeds. Now listen to a powerful voice from the past. The Buddhist text known as the Sutta Nipata says that no one is a Brāhmana and no one is an outcast simply by birth, but only by their deeds. Let me explain why this matters so much. This teaching, from the Vasala Sutta, plainly states that a person becomes noble or low through their own actions and not through their family. What a bold and beautiful idea! It is an early and very powerful argument that a person's character and not their birth should decide their true worth. These are words worth remembering. The emergence of Jati. Finally, let us understand how the many Jatis came into being. Jati developed gradually, over a very long time, due to several causes: intermarriage, migration, endogamy, or marrying within one's own group, territorial differences, and the rise of new occupations. Let me explain. As communities settled in different regions, married within their own groups, and took up specialized trades, hundreds upon hundreds of distinct Jatis slowly formed. So you see, the Jati system was not created all at once by anyone. It grew, quietly and gradually, through ordinary social processes over a very long stretch of time. Next, we will clearly distinguish Varna from Jati, and then discover how people in early India could actually move and change their place in society. The difference between Varna and Jati. Let us begin by clearing up a common confusion. Varna was a fourfold, broad category. Jati, on the other hand, was far more numerous, more local, and closely linked to occupation, to marriage, and to community identity. Let me give you a simple way to remember the difference. Varna was the wide theoretical framework with just 4 divisions. Jati described the thousands of real communities that people actually lived in, from day to day. So Varna was the grand idea on paper, while Jati was the living reality on the ground. Social mobility. Now here is something that may surprise you. Varna and Jati were not always rigid. In fact, some rulers and groups came from quite diverse social backgrounds. Let me explain. History clearly shows that people could move up or change their roles. Several powerful dynasties did not come from Kshatriya families at all, and traders, warriors and officials often rose through their ability, their wealth, or their service, rather than through birth alone. So society was more open and more dynamic than the neat theory might suggest. Diverse ruling families. Let us look at the proof of this. Dynasties such as the Nandas, the Mauryas, the Shungas, the Satavahanas, the Vakatakas, the Guptas, and the Pushyabhutis all show varied social backgrounds. Let me explain why this is so important. Since these ruling houses rose from very different origins, some humble, some priestly, and some of quite uncertain ancestry, they prove something remarkable, that in actual practice, political power was never the monopoly of any one Varna. We learn this from the Puranic king lists and from inscriptions. Ability and opportunity, it seems, mattered greatly. The Mandsaur silk weavers. Here is a truly wonderful example. The Mandsaur stone inscription, dated 473 of the Common Era, records a guild of silk weavers who migrated all the way from Lata in Gujarat to Dashapura in Madhya Pradesh. And these weavers were skilled not only in weaving, but also in archery, in astrology, and in other kinds of work. Let me explain what this shows. Quite remarkably, these very same weavers took up entirely new professions, such as soldiering, astrology, and storytelling, and together they funded the building of a grand sun temple. Just think about that. It proves that people could change their occupations, and that a humble craft guild could also become a wealthy and cultured community. Brāhmaṇas as land managers. Finally, let us look at one more surprising example. Inscriptions, such as the Karatalai copper plates of Maharaja Jayanatha from the late 5th century of the Common Era, record Brāhmaṇas working as land managers. This shows that occupations could extend well beyond ritual functions. Let me explain. Here we see Brāhmaṇas handling land and administration, rather than only performing priestly duties. This reminds us of a very important truth, that real occupations often crossed the neat boundaries suggested by the Varna theory. Life, as always, was richer and more flexible than the textbook scheme. Next, we will travel south to see how early Tamil society was organized by occupation, and then return to the very foundation of society, the family. Sangam society and occupations. Let us begin in the Tamil land. The Tolkappiyam mentions 4 broad groups: the Arasar, who were kings, the Vanigar, who were merchants, the Velar, who were farmers, and the Antanar, who were Brāhmanas. Other Sangam texts also describe salt makers, fishermen, artisans, agriculturists, and warriors. Let me explain what this tells us. It shows that early Tamil society was organized largely around occupation and livelihood. This gives us a southern picture that beautifully complements the northern Varna scheme, reminding us that India's social story was never told in just one single way. Occupational basis in Tamil society. Let us look a little deeper. A Sangam work called the Patinappalai portrays a prosperous, trade-oriented society in which merchants, salt makers, fishermen, artisans, farmers, and warriors all interacted with one another. Let me explain its importance. Together with the Tolkappiyam, this suggests a flexible, occupation-based social order, rather than a completely rigid classification. Just picture that bustling port world it describes, where people of many different trades mixed freely in the markets and streets. This strengthens the view that early Tamil society ranked people more by their work and their wealth than by fixed groups of birth. Kula as the basic unit. Now let us return to the very heart of society, the family. In Vedic society, the Kula, or family, was the smallest social unit, and it connected each individual to the wider society. Let me explain. The Kula was headed by the eldest member, called the Kula party. And it was here, within the family, that a child first learned their duties, their values, and their skills. So the family acted as the basic building block, from which all the larger groups, such as the Grama and the Jana, were formed. Everything, you see, began at home. Grama, Visha, and Jana. Let us now climb the social ladder, step by step. Several families together formed a Grama, or village. Groups of Gramas together formed a Visha, which was headed by a Visha party. And above the Visha stood the Jana, the whole people, who were protected by the Raja. Let me explain why this matters. This neat ladder, Kula to Grama to Visha to Jana, shows how personal life, local life, and political life were all linked together in one single chain. And so, quite naturally, loyalty to one's own family widened outward into loyalty to the whole people. Gotra. Finally, let us understand the idea of gotra. A gotra referred to a patrilineal lineage, that is, a line of descent traced through the father, linked to a common ancestor, who was often a great Vedic sage. And this idea directly influenced marriage practices. Let me explain how. Because all members of the same gotra were regarded as descendants of one and the same shishi, they were considered to be kin, like one large family. And so marriage within the same gotra was generally avoided. This was, in fact, a very early and wise rule, meant to prevent marriages between close relatives. Next, we will explore the 4 great stages of life, the ashramas, that gave a meaningful shape to a person's whole journey, from student to renunciant. The 4 ashramas. Let us begin with a beautiful idea. The 4 ashramas were brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyasa. Together, they divided life into 4 stages. Let me explain. This scheme mapped out an ideal life journey: first study, then family and work, then a gradual withdrawal, and finally, renunciation. Each phase was given its own duties, so that a person could balance learning, responsibility, and spiritual growth across a whole lifetime. What a thoughtful way to plan a life. Brahmacharya. Let us look at the first stage. Brahmacharya was the stage of studentship. It focused on learning, on discipline, and on preparation for life. Let me explain. In this stage, the young student typically lived with a guru, practiced self-control, and mastered the texts and skills of their time. It was here that they built the knowledge and the character needed for all the responsibilities that were still to come. Grihastha. Next comes the second stage. Grihastha was the householder stage. It involved family, livelihood, social duties, and the support of society. Let me explain why this stage was so important. Indeed, it was often seen as the most important of all. This is because the householder earned wealth, raised the next generation, and supported students, renunciants, and guests alike. In this way, the householder sustained the entire social order through their work and their generosity. Vanaprastha. Now the third stage. Vanaprastha was the forest-dwelling stage. It involved a gradual withdrawal from active life and a turning towards reflection. Let me explain. After the family duties had been fulfilled, a person was expected to loosen their attachment to wealth and to daily affairs, and to turn instead towards study, contemplation, and the guiding of others. It was a slow and deliberate movement, from action towards the inner life. Samnyasa. Finally, the fourth stage. Samnyasa was the stage of renunciation. It focused on detachment and on spiritual pursuit. Let me explain. In this final stage, the renunciant gave up possessions and social ties in order to seek moksha, which means liberation. This shows us something profound about the whole scheme, that its ultimate goal was spiritual freedom and not worldly success. Life's journey in this ideal pointed always towards something higher. Next, we will learn about the life cycle rituals and the 4 great goals of life, and then begin a wonderful theme, the role of women in early India. The 16 samskaras. Let us begin. The Shodasha samskaras were 16 rituals that marked the important events of life, from birth all the way to death. These rituals connected a person's private life with the wider society. Let me explain. Ceremonies stretching from birth, naming, and the start of education right through to marriage and the final rites gave shape and meaning to life's key moments. And by performing them publicly, a family bound itself firmly into the wider community. So these rituals were not only personal, they were deeply social too. The Puruṣhasūktas. Remember this key idea. The four goals of life were Dhamma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Together, they gave direction to human life. Let me explain the balance they taught. A person was to pursue duty, which is Dhamma, wealth, which is Artha, and desires, which is Kama, but always keeping them guided by Dhamma, while ultimately aiming at Moksha, or liberation. In this way, material aims and spiritual aims were meant to work together rather than against each other. It was a wise recipe for a balanced life. Dhamma and Artha. Let us look more closely at wealth. Wealth, or Artha, was considered perfectly acceptable, but only when it was guided by Dhamma. This teaches us that economic life should always serve the welfare of society. Let me explain. Earning and enjoying wealth were never condemned in this tradition, but they were expected to stay within ethical limits. That is, wealth should be gained honestly and used responsibly. In this way, prosperity would support the community rather than harm it. The role of women in the Vedic period. Now we begin a very important theme. In the Vedic period, women participated in scholarly learning, performed some rituals alongside their male counterparts, took part in chariot races, and attended gatherings, including the Sabha. In fact, several Ṛig Vedic hymns are attributed to women sages. Let me explain what this tells us. It shows that in the early Vedic period, at least some women were educated, active in public and ritual life, and respected as composers of sacred verse. This is a fuller and a more equal picture than is sometimes assumed. Women sages. Let us meet some of these remarkable women. Apala, Vishvavara, Ghosha, and Lopamudra were women sages associated with Vedic intellectual life. And goddesses such as Usha, the goddess of dawn, and Aditi, the mother of the gods, also held revered positions. Let me explain why this matters. The memory of these learned women, the Brahmavadinis, together with the honoring of such powerful goddesses, shows us that the feminine was valued both in human learning and in the sacred imagination of the Vedic world. Next, we will see how early texts spoke of respect for women, how women's position changed over time, and the powerful roles some women played as rulers, donors, and workers. Respect for women. Let us begin with a famous teaching. The Manu Smriti says that where women are honored, the sacred rites become fruitful. This reflects a high ideal of respect. Let me explain. The well-known verse that the gods themselves rejoice where women are honored sets out a clear moral standard for how women should be treated. Now, we must be honest and note that everyday practice did not always live up to this ideal. But the ideal itself was stated clearly and beautifully. The changing position of women. Now here is an important and balanced point. Women's position and roles fluctuated over time and sometimes declined as conditions changed. And yet, throughout, women continued to contribute to household management, to agriculture, to crafts, and to religion. Let me explain further. Gupta Vakataka literature portrays educated women skilled in the arts, while inscriptions record queens, regents, and donors. So even where their formal status weakened over time, women remained economically productive and culturally active, and some exercised real political and religious authority. This warns us against seeing their history as simply one of steady, unbroken decline. Prabhavati Gupta. Let us look at a striking example. Prabhavati Gupta was the daughter of Chandragupta II, and she ruled as regent in the Vakataka kingdom, issuing land grants in her own name. She is a wonderful example of women in governance. Let me explain. Ruling on behalf of her young sons, she issued official land grants under her own authority. This is concrete proof recorded in the Vakataka copperplate grants that a woman could indeed hold and exercise real political power in early India. Women as donors. Here is more evidence of women's active role. Votive inscriptions mention many women as donors. This shows that women took part in both religious and economic patronage. Let me explain. At great sites such as Sanchi and Bahut, inscriptions name nuns, wives, and ordinary women who gave gifts to monasteries and stupas. This is clear evidence that many women controlled some wealth of their own and chose to spend it on public and religious causes. Their names, carved in stone, still speak to us today. Women in Sangam literature. Let us now turn to the south. Sangam texts show women working in agriculture, in cattle rearing, in spinning, in fishing, in salt production, and in garland selling. Let me explain what this gives us. It paints a lively and vivid picture of ordinary women as active workers in the southern economy. These women contributed directly to their families' livelihoods and to local trade. So, from the north to the south, women were everywhere a vital part of economic life. Next, we will honor some remarkable women poets and patrons, and then begin exploring the rich religious life of early India. Women poets and cultural figures. Let us celebrate some gifted women. Avayar and Venikuyatiyar show us the literary and cultural contributions of women in early Tamil society. Let me explain, especially about Avayar. She is remembered as a revered poet, whose verses on wisdom and ethics are still recited today, so many centuries later. This shows us that women could earn lasting fame and deep respect through their learning and their literature. What a proud legacy to leave behind. Sembian Mahadevi. Let us meet a great royal patron. Sembian Mahadevi supported temple building and religious institutions during the Chola period. Let me explain. A Chola queen, she is famous for commissioning and renovating many Shiva temples over several decades of her life. This makes her one of the most influential royal patrons of art and religion of her entire age. Through her generosity and vision, she shaped the sacred landscape of the Tamil country for generations to come. Vedic religious life. Now we begin a fascinating new theme, religion. The Vedic pantheon was not rigidly hierarchical. Different deities could be praised as supreme in different hymns. Let me explain. Scholars call this henotheism. It means that whichever god was being worshipped at that particular moment was addressed as the very greatest of all. This shows us a flexible and inclusive way of imagining the divine, rather than a fixed and rigid ranking of the gods. Nature worship. Let us look at what the Vedic people worshipped. The Vedic deities were closely connected with the forces of nature, with the sun, the rain, fire, the earth, and the dawn. Nature itself was treated as sacred. Let me explain with some examples. Gods such as Surya, the sun, Indra, the god of rain and storm, Agni, the fire, and Ushas, the dawn, all show that the Vedic people saw divine power in the natural world all around them. This encouraged a deep respect for and gratitude towards nature, festivals, and continuity. Finally, let us see how the past lives on. Practices such as sun worship continue even today, in festivals like Chath and Makar Sankranti. This shows a wonderful cultural continuity. Let me explain. Rituals whose roots go back thousands of years are still being performed in our own time. This helps us feel the living link, the unbroken thread, between the ancient Vedic reverence for the sun and our very own present-day festivals. Next, we will discover the great renunciant thinkers, the rise of the Bhakti movement, and the beloved saint poets of the Tamil land. The renunciants. Let us begin. Around the middle of the first millennium BCE, renunciants became prominent. They were known by various names: parivrājakas, meaning wanderers; bhikshus, meaning those who live on alms; and shramanas, meaning those who strive. Let me explain. Renunciation already existed within the Vedic tradition, especially in the vanaprastha and samnyasa stages of life. But around the middle of the first millennium BCE, these seekers grew far more numerous and organized. They questioned ritual and searched directly for truth and liberation. It was out of this great ferment of ideas that movements such as Buddhism and Jainism arose. The Buddha and Mahavira. Let us meet two great teachers. Gautama Buddha and Mahavira were the major thinkers of the renunciant tradition. Both emphasized discipline, ethics, and liberation. Let me explain their teachings. The Buddha taught the middle path and the Four Noble Truths, while Mahavira stressed rigorous non-violence, or ahimsa, and deep self-restraint. And here is something truly wonderful. Both of them preached in the people's own languages, and both welcomed followers regardless of their birth. Their message was open to all. Bhakti. Now let us come to one of the most beloved movements of all, Bhakti. Bhakti offered a direct, personal connection with a chosen deity, without the need for elaborate Vedic rituals, and it was open to everyone, regardless of class or gender. Let me explain. Early references to Bhakti occur in the Mahabharata, while organized Bhakti became prominent from about the 6th century in the Tamil region through the Auvars and the Nayanmars. By stressing love and devotion over costly ritual, Bhakti opened the spiritual path to everyone. And because its Tamil saint poets sang in the local language, it became one of the most popular and inclusive religious movements in all of Indian history. The Auvars. Let us meet the first group of these saint poets. The Auvars were 12 Tamil saint poets devoted to Lord Vishnu. Their hymns shaped Vaishnava Bhakti. Let me explain. Their Tamil verses, which were later collected together as the Divya Prabandham, expressed an intense personal love for Vishnu and were sung in the temples. In this way, they spread devotional religion far and wide across the Tamil country. The Nayanmars. Finally, let us meet their companions in devotion. The Nayanmars were 63 Shaiva saint poets devoted to Lord Shiva. They helped to spread Tamil Bhakti literature. Let me explain. Their passionate hymns to Shiva, later gathered together in the Tevaram, were sung right across the region. And so, alongside the Auvars, the Nayanmars made the Tamil land a great cradle of the entire Bhakti movement. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson. To sum up, the 4 ashramas shaped life into stages of study, family, withdrawal, and renunciation. The samskaras and the puruṣhāthas gave life both ritual and purpose. Women in early India were scholars, sages, rulers, donors, and workers. The Vedic people revered nature and the divine in many forms. And finally, the renunciants, the Buddha and Mahavira, and the Bhakti saints opened new and inclusive paths to truth and devotion. Well done, everyone. We will continue in the next lesson.
Welcome to a world of learning, wonder, and discovery. Together, we'll make every idea simple, exciting, and memorable. Watch until the end because every section reveals something new. Stay curious, enjoy every moment of this learning adventure. Subscribe, like, and comment.
Class 9 and 10 students. Don't worry, make science and social science easy with your CBSE teacher. Subscribe now, like, comment, and press the bell.